Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I'm Jason. I'm a guy in long-term recovery.
And I'm Billy. I'm also a guy in long-term recovery.
And we're going to talk about Tradition 2, which says, for our group purpose, there's but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. That's long as fuck, and that's the title of this podcast. That is not going to fit on YouTube's title allowance.
No one's going to find that in a search.
Nobody's going to look for it, because nobody gives a fuck about the traditions.
Stop typing all those words and 3 or 4 words in.
I'm not going to lie. So my fear of doing the traditions was that, oh my God, these are going to be extremely boring. And I was like, well, we'll have to do our best to make them fun by not, let's give a little explanation of how they apply in NA. That seems pretty straightforward, I honestly think. I know we do tradition work, but I'm like, these seem pretty fucking straightforward to me. But then hey, let's take most of the episode and put these out in the real world so that they're more interesting and expound on how to apply them in our lives. And I don't know, man. After reading this one, I was like, this is going to be a fucking challenge. This is work.
And I said, this is the one where I take probably the most out of it and probably find the most useful in my daily life.
I think this goes back to Tradition 1 when we talked about how you have an interpretation of the traditions as things you need to do in your life. And I think traditions only work when they're done as a group. Because I don't see any people interacting healthfully as a group, I'm like, we can't work traditions outside of NA. It's impossible. We can't even work them in NA. I mean, there's factions splitting off from World and literature printing and who the fuck knows what's going on. But
I read a bunch of that funny stuff.
But definitely outside of NA, these don't apply because the group doesn't act in them or on them.
Yeah, and I look at the steps. When I look at the steps, I think I apply them in a way that works really specific to me. I don't just apply them to drugs and how drugs affected my life. Right. So, for example, when I say I turn my will and my life over to care of God, well, I don't just apply that to addiction. I apply that to a lot of areas of my life. Mm-hmm. But in the same vein, I don't go to the fucking restaurant and sit down to look at the menu of what dinner I want to order and then go, what is God's will for me to eat today? I don't put it into that context either. But there are people that do. They make decisions in their life based on, how much they're trying to follow God's will and, what that means to them, what that looks like. And I just find, for me, the traditions sort of fall in that same category of I can take a lot of these principles. I mean, they're written specifically for Narcotics Anonymous, so they apply more specifically to.
Technically, they're written for Alcoholics Anonymous.
Technically, they were written for Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah, we borrowed them.
Borrowed.
It's a more spiritual term, borrowed.
It's a spiritual principle of borrowing.
Stealing with someone's knowledge.
Yeah, and never to return it.
Yeah. So, I take these principles, and even though they apply or should hopefully apply specifically to our service structure and our groups and some of that stuff, I can take the same principles and apply them in different aspects of my life.
Did you have a moment of clarity early in recovery where things just made more sense to you or you saw them differently than you ever had before? If I stop getting high, I won't have the problems of getting high. Just some really...
Oh, I had that actually before I got clean, actually. But
okay.
Yeah.
But all the times before that, you couldn't see that, even though it was probably evident long before you had that revelation.
Oh, yeah.
So to me, that moment of clarity is like an outside event, or at least an outside inspired event, because I wasn't in control of it, right? I couldn't have it when I wanted to.
Yep.
It just kind of happened. So I say when I go to a restaurant and I order, there's some similar outside event thing that happens that creates a feeling in me that has a desire for a specific taste of a certain food. And I don't have anything to do with that. So I would have to call that God's will. Like, I don't know. I can't make myself want a certain food. I want whatever the fuck I want in that moment, and I don't have any control over that.
Yeah, but do you always eat what you want?
If I'm looking at a menu, I do.
Mm-hmm.
I eat whatever my body's telling me to order off that menu.
Well, and I guess where I was thinking with that, and I don't know how this would change that
Is it part of the tradition?
Yeah, right. Is like I've been trying to eat exceptionally healthy lately. Cut out sugar, cut out carbs. Fuck if I don't want some ice cream and a bowl of cereal, like fucking Apple Jacks. Looks delicious, and we got it right in the cabinet. And I want to eat that shit. And I guess if you wanted to say, like for me, following God's will is like, no, I want to take care of myself physically. I'm getting a little older. I want to be, at my best. And the way I can be at my best is to physically take care of myself. And so I try to make healthy choices when I eat. I don't just eat what I want. I eat what's good for me.
I will not spend an hour arguing about menu choices with you as much as I want to. So I read through the basic text about this tradition, and really I was like, how in the world are we going to apply this outside of NA? I mean, I'm not saying it can't apply. It just doesn't seem like it works as well. And I don't think, if anything, I saw that, hey, the world's fucked up, and maybe it's because we don't live like this. Like, maybe it's because we don't listen to any ultimate authority, or any higher power helping us along, which kind of leads me back to that whole, oh, you took God out of government and that's where everything got fucked up. And I honestly don't like people who say that. I'm like, yeah, God doesn't belong in government because we all have different gods, but it would be nice if we all had a higher power understanding. And I don't know how you do that in a world full of people who don't believe in God. I mean, can you express to them, hey, the will of all of us together, the collective good of people is the higher power? Like, I mean, is that what you would say is the higher power for you? Like, you don't really specifically have God.
Yeah, I would say the betterment, the advancement, the improvement of the quality of lives of everyone should, sort of trump, I hate to use that word, but, should trump my own personal desires and wants for myself.
Basically, I guess in NA, the way this works and the point of this tradition that I understood, so like, let's tackle the NA version first. That seems easy, right? It's that we don't want any leaders. We don't want any, like people say in meetings, no big I's and little U's, right? There's no one or a group of people that are more important than everybody else. Everybody's equal. That's the entire goal of the whole anonymous fellowship idea, is that we don't have any president dictating orders. We don't have any governmental form, sending down laws to us. The service structure's upside down, like I think you mentioned in the last tradition, where at the top of the service is all the home groups. Every home group is at the top. And then we dictate what we need to the larger bodies of service that are beneath us. Like, hey, we need a committee to make events. Like, do that for us. And then they do our bidding. They are humble servants. And I will say that is one of the things I do love about this tradition, the idea that leaders should be humble servants. They should be, the people that are there to help, not people that are there to rule.
And when I was reading some of this, what I found sort of interesting, not to get away from NA stuff, but I look at, ideally, I believe that's how the democracy that we have was supposed to be set up. And the idea that we had periodic voting was so that you could hold your leaders accountable. And so that if they weren't serving the will of their constituents, that they would be, if you're not doing a good job, we're going to kick you out. And that it's not about you serving yourself. It's about you serving the will of the people you represent. The difference in NA is our system, I'm going to say for the most part, hasn't been too corrupted at this point, at least in a spirit of the groups that still exists. Like it typically isn't individual members taking over and deciding how things are supposed to run. I mean, that happens from time to time, but in the big scheme of things, or if you were to generalize, you would say, for the most part, meetings happen independent of the individuals that run them.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The idea behind democracy is that there is but one ultimate authority, which is the group itself. We are the ones voting on this ultimate authority. So as, it says, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. And maybe we don't believe in God as a society as a whole, but the democratic idea is the idea that as a group together, we will decide what's best for us. And that is our ultimate authority, no one individual. And I think that's why they came up with term limits for president, so that nobody got deified or made into a larger than life figure that couldn't be removed. That was the idea behind that, was that they didn't want anybody to get that kind of power or hold over people. They wanted to keep switching it out so that the nation didn't follow one person. We keep changing that.
Right. And I believe in our fellowship, that's sort of the way it's, again, supposed to go. We have different individuals that serve the groups. And so, not to get too into the weeds on what is a group and what isn't a group, but there's some argument or discussion about what, in that tradition, it says, for our group's purpose. And so typically what I think of as a NA group is the individual meetings. The service structure doesn't technically qualify as a group based on the description of a group in the group pamphlet. Like the group pamphlet talks about a NA group is 2 or more addicts meeting regularly for the purpose of recovery. And a service committee that meets to discuss business stuff, I guess you could argue, and I don't know how I feel on either end of this, and this is nerdy recovery argument shit, people. If you get really bored and you want to get into some of the weeds in some of this, it's kind of interesting to me. But is a service structure a group, and does the service structure have to adhere to NA traditions? And
yes,
I mean, I believe so too. I think so too. But there's an argument that that's not what we do at business meetings. We don't necessarily, unless you're saying a vote is a group conscious, which I don't necessarily think that it is. Does a service committee qualify as a group? This tradition specifically says for our group's purpose, there's but one ultimate authority. Not for the fellowship of NA, there is one ultimate authority.
I don't know if this changes anything or not, but it doesn't say groups '(s). It says for our group purpose.
Yeah.
I don't know if that changes the meaning of it. To me, that just means that's not just it's not like capital G group. This is the group as defined as the NA group. This is any group of people in recovery. It's
another one of those technicalities where they could have used a better word. We should rewrite these to make them more clear.
I really think our
for
rewriting
our
of the steps.
Purpose, there is one ultimate authority.
Yeah.
Okay. I can go with that. That's how I personally have always applied all this. I've always applied traditions, and my behavior in any service boards or committees I've ever been a part of has been to try to adhere to the traditions and follow them as my guiding principles.
You should have brought on somebody that disagreed so we could have told them how wrong they were. So I think this in general, the idea is, hey, no one person's personality or influence, no matter how long they have clean, how many steps they've worked, how great of a meeting they share, they don't run a group. They don't take over, the group doesn't take on their personality. The entire area doesn't take on decisions and vote just for them because that's what they want and everybody believes in them. The whole point of this is that people are not leaders. They're trusted servants. And going back to the democracy example, I think our elected officials are supposed to also be public servants.
Yeah.
That is their goal, to serve the public. That's not what we see happen. We elect the president as if they're a leader. They call them the leader of the free world and all that great stuff. But I think one of the things I do love is that idea that when I'm leading best, I'm leading by example. I am just being a trusted servant and doing what's best for the group to the best of my ability, humbly, without a whole lot of dictating out things that people need to do that I'm not willing to do myself.
Yeah, and we do have leaders in recovery. They do exist. It says our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern, meaning we have people that we appoint to positions.
Yeah, they're not CEOs and managers.
Right. And I think in the spirit of this tradition, one of the sayings I picked out of the basic text that I really liked about leadership was, we have learned that leadership by example and selfless service works. Direction and manipulation fails. And that's I think, what we hope our political leaders are going to do. But that feels like such a fucking joke, nowadays. Like, that is so far away from where we are in that realm. And you see, though, how disgruntled, agitated, annoyed that most people are, either on the left or the right. You have people on the left that are upset about a lot of ways the government runs, people on the right that are really upset about a lot of ways the government runs, because we've lost our, as you said, we've almost lost our way of our common welfare, of what should be important, what we're focused on, our common goals or common good. Like, all that seems to be lost. And it's nice that we're in a fellowship, that we have these sort of traditions laid out that keep us on that path so that we don't stumble down the same fucking road.
Right. So I had that exact quote too, and the rest of it, the next couple sentences say, "We choose not to have presidents, masters, or directors. Instead, we have secretaries, treasurers, and representatives. These titles imply service rather than control." And I like that part of it too. I thought it was a great quote altogether. And talking about what you're talking about, I was having a conversation with Stephanie yesterday, and it just really baffles me. You talk about losing our way. If you put a group of 5 and 6-year-old kids in a room and said, "Hey, what should we do for people who have needs, outside of what the normal or average everyday person needs? Like, what should we do for them?" All the 5 and 6-year-olds unanimously would say, "Well, we just meet their needs. We just take care of them," right? Like, "Oh, you got people with addiction problems? Well, we just have services for people with addiction problems. Oh, you got people with mental health? Yeah, well, we just, we have services for people with mental health." And every 5 and 6-year-old in that room is going to raise their hand and vote that, yes, you should just have the needs met for people. And then somehow, when you talk about losing our way, we turn into adults and then decide that, like, I think we first come to this realization that's just not how the world works. And then B, we kind of get on board with, like, well, the best way we can proceed is this way or that way or another way. And I feel like we've lost our way so much. The only reason the world doesn't work that way is because we don't just do it. And if we have the resources, we know the world has enough resources for people. So why don't we just meet people's needs? It seems so easy to 5 and 6-year-olds, and where the fuck do we get lost and jaded that we don't just think that it's adults? Like, yeah, there's needs to be met. Let's just meet them.
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer for that one. I mean, yes, I agree. I think our society has lost its way as far as living by principles. For the United States, I mean, we live by some principles. I don't think we adhere to them near as much as we like to believe we do. I think in general, and even including myself, are way more selfish than I like to admit. We just had a sort of brief conversation before this about volunteering for something, and I'm like, I'm fucking volunteering.
Yeah.
And my heart's been in wanting to volunteer, and I say I want to volunteer for shit. I've said it for years, but the actual following through of giving up my time freely is like, ooh, that seems like such an inconvenience. Like,
how much are they paying for that volunteer spot?
But I will say, and this gets back to unity and same with trying to adhere and follow the will of a higher power, because the system is fucked up and failing and not working, doesn't give me the right to go, well, it's fucked up, failing, and not working, so I'll just do whatever I want too. Fuck it. Doesn't matter. I want to be a person that has integrity. So if I am involved in a group, whatever I decide that group is to be. So if I'm involved in a group, let's put it back to a service committee. I'm in area service, and it turns into, a bunch of arguing, yelling, people debating over shit. I don't believe that gives me the right, or I shouldn't say gives me the right. I have the right to do whatever the fuck I want to do. I don't think that justifies me turning into someone who now gets to argue and yell and scream at someone because they're arguing, yelling, and screaming at me. So I obviously get to do that back. Like, that's not the person that I want to be.
Right.
What I learned through recovery is just doing what I feel like I want to do and throwing out my morals and values, leads to like a degradation of self, and that I want to live by my morals and values in spite of what's going on around me, in spite of what's going on in area service. So when I'm trying to be the person who's, trusting this higher power to work in that group. Just because the rest of the group threw that out the fucking window and said, fuck that, I'm going to argue about what I think is important. I don't want to fall into that. I want to be the stronger person that kind of rises above and tries. I might even fail. Whether I fail or succeed isn't the point. The point is that I try to stay on the path of living those principles, of turning my will and life over to the higher power, of being the one that tries my best to focus on unity, to focus on our common welfare, to focus on all those things, and then just leave the outcome up to the higher power, leave the outcome up to whatever's going to happen. Because I don't have, as you would almost say, like, I don't have a fucking choice anyway of what happens. It's all God's will, whatever the outcome is anyway. So whether I argue, yell, and scream and throw my values out the window and act like a fucking child, or whether I try to rise up, be the better person, go home at the end of the day and say, you know what? I did the best I could. I did what I feel is right in my heart. I live by values that I think are important. What happened really isn't the most important thing. The most important thing isn't winning or being right or being the best.
You sure about that?
Yeah. Well, it feels like that a lot. And I've learned that through NA. I've learned that I think I'm right a lot. I think my way is the best all the time, and
I think you're right a lot too until we disagree.
Right. But that's not always what's most important. You know what I mean?
Right.
That if I'm serving the will of a higher power, if I'm serving the will of a higher good, then me being right isn't what needs to matter the most.
And so is that, I think maybe that stems from the fact that it's almost impossible to trust that it'll work out when you don't have that faith or belief in some power greater than you taking care of it. If I don't believe that there's a God or a universal power or a common brotherhood of man, then I'm going to have to live in the idea that I need to exert some control in this situation, because if not, it's going to get fucked up. I don't have any trust that it's going to be okay. And when I don't have any trust that it's going to be okay, I now live in fear. And that fear is going to make me act in ways that aren't spiritual, right? Because that's what I think kind of like the combatant of spiritual principles is, that self-centered fear, that core fear that this won't work out if I don't step up and make a change. And I think that's where all this anger and hatred in politics in the world comes from. People are living in fear. If I don't do something, this is going to all turn out terrible, right? There's no trust that it'll turn out fine. And that's what the news stations pander to. Like they say this shit, like it's all fear. Oh, democracy is going to fall apart. Oh, the world's going to end if we don't elect this person. Like it's all fear based. And like, that's where I think outside of a 12-step program, there's a struggle, because a lot of people don't anymore really talk or think or believe in a bigger power. And I'm not saying that bigger power has to be God specifically, or the Starbucks chick universe power that I love, but we got to believe in some kind of bigger power than us and not think that we have control over everything.
Right. And I agree with that totally. That's sort of, I'm going to use that as the argument of why I don't get too hung up into the political stuff anymore. It's like,
it'll work out.
Well, that, and that all those people that I think are so wrong are still my brothers and sisters and people that are in the same community as me. Whether they acknowledge that or not isn't what's important. I acknowledge that these are still people that, my higher power has entrusted me personally to love and care about and try to do good for, and to try to be like a servant of in my life.
I'm just picturing that old, saying, the student has become the master or whatever. And one day there'll be memes like, the sheeple has become the shepherd.
Yeah.
And this is one of the concepts that I don't feel like has applied much in our world. I look at the president as a public servant and I say, why are we electing a president based on his political views or ideas about which way we need to go? Because I don't personally believe that's the president's job. I don't give a fuck what the president believes. I want him to do what the people want him to do, period. Like, I don't think the president, honestly, needs any beliefs politically or any direction, because that's not his fucking job. He's not supposed to guide me. We are supposed to tell him what we're looking for as a society, and he's supposed to make that happen. So I'm kind of baffled by the whole presidential election stuff where we look at their views and which way they want to go. Like, who gives a fuck which way they want to go? They should, if you were elected president and you don't want abortions to ever happen again, but 75% of the population is polled and they come to you and say, dude, we think abortions are necessary. You're just supposed to fucking do that, whether you believe in it or not. That's my idea of what the president's supposed to be. It's not about what the fuck you want as president. It's about what is best for the most people, I think.
Yeah. Well, politics, again, is rough because there's so many misconstrued values there. There's so much manipulation and financial misaligned incentives. You know, like all that shit is so corrupt right now that it's hard to look at that and figure out how we apply this, you know, because, you know, and we've seen this in recovery fellowships in NA, people get in charge and try to run meetings and run areas, and people get involved in different subcommittees and run those committees their own way. I mean, we have those same issues within our fellowship. We just are lucky enough to sort of have an outline that guides us back, you know what I mean, for the most part, to where we need to go. When I look at this and how it applies to my life now, I try to look at my role and what I can do and what kind of person I want to be, not necessarily, you know, what's the fucking least common denominator. Like, you know, because I can fall right into that least common denominator. I have an opinion on all those things too. Immigration, abortion, you know, fucking the drug epidemic. Like, I have strong opinions on all that stuff. You know, so do I just want to pick a side, jump on a team and start battling it out? Or do I want to look at a different approach to that and say, all right, well, I don't know. Maybe my approach to those things isn't right. And it's not about me being right or wrong or you being wrong. It's about, all right, we're all people. How do we fucking get everyone together in a room to have an actual conversation about the best path forward? Like, how do we get people to sort of come around to see, like, look, hey, what's going on over in this community that's like ravaged with poverty and ravaged with kids that are being raised, you know, uneducated and poor. Like, that matters, even though I live over in this neighborhood that's nice and has manicured lawns and a gated fucking community. Like, how do we make that connection? Instead of jumping on a team and saying, well, I'm on team gated community and fuck those poor people. You know, I want to try to be a person that focuses more on bringing that shit together. And I think that's in the spirit of unity and then in the serving, you know, a higher power's will in my life.
Yeah, I need a new political party because none of them meet what I'm looking for.
And, you know, to get back a little bit to NA and like this tradition, like how it applies in my life. So the whole first paragraph in our basic text, they talk about tradition 2, and the whole first paragraph is exactly how I live most of my life for me, not how I think everyone else lives. I'm talking about for me in my life. And it says, in Narcotics Anonymous, we are concerned with protecting ourselves from ourselves. Our second tradition is an example of this. By nature, we are strong-willed, self-centered people who are thrust together in NA. We are mismanagers, and not one of us is consistently capable of making good decisions. That is me in my life. You know what I mean? Before I found recovery, I was exactly that. I was incapable of making good decisions. That can be me now still today. You know, I can still be a person that is a complete mismanager and incapable of making good decisions if I don't keep my eye sort of focused on recovery, the guiding principles of, in this case, the 12 steps, because that's the fellowship that I'm in and a part of right now. But if I don't keep my eye squarely on that, I will become I'm a mismanager with the guidance of the fellowship, you know?
Well, and I think the key word in there is consistently, right? Yeah, like all of us can make some good decisions here and there and maybe a few in a row, but I don't think any of us, I agree with that. And I had that one written down. I don't think any of us can consistently make decisions that are in the best interest of all. Like, sometimes we just start thinking about us, man. We get an itch, we want a car, we want this, and then we're like willing to sacrifice some of our values to get there, and it just happens. It's hard to be self-aware and in tune every fucking day of the year. And there's going to be days I'm not. It's just the way it is. There's going to be days I'm more tired. There's going to be days I'm more angry, lonely, hungry. Like, all those apply. There's going to be days when I'm sad, I'm going to lose people, I'm going to go through grief. Like, there's just going to be times when I don't make good fucking choices.
Right. And so in that context, like that whole sentiment there, for me personally, doesn't necessarily apply to the United States. Although you could substitute the word Narcotics Anonymous with United States and read that statement again, and it would be applicable to, I'm going to say, as optimistic as I am, like 90% of our population are mismanagers and incapable of consistently making good decisions. I can apply that. So again, it's hard to look at that on like this global or this national level. Like, what does that mean in my life? But I can apply that consistently at my job or in my family. Like I can say, hey, at my job, even though I'm in a leadership role, even though I'm in a management position where I make decisions and have authority and that sort of thing, I have to remind myself that I'm a fucking mismanager and I am incapable of consistently making good decisions. And that if I really want things to go really well, I'll look to the group and talk to everyone and say, hey, this is what's going on. These are some decisions we need to make. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to do what they say.
Yeah, because we'd have popsicles for dinner.
Right. But it means that I can talk to people, address their concerns, approach things in the spirit of unity, be a person that says, you know what, maybe my way isn't the best. Let's talk about it. Let's make some decisions and work through this and see where everybody's at, see what everybody thinks and feels, and then try to proceed with a path that is the best going forward.
Yeah, maybe we can have popsicles after dinner. Or maybe even we can have ice cream for dinner one night out of 2 months or something. Just not every fucking night.
This episode has been brought to you by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit, grassroots recovery community organization located in Maryland. Voices of Hope is made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity and respect of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopececilmd.org and consider donating to our cause.
I think reading this was a very good reminder of like the leader I want to be. I want to be a leader by example, right? And I try to do that in my daily life. Trust me, I got a bunch of kids that don't pick up after themselves, and it's super fucking frustrating. I got kids that will, if I just watch, they will walk over the trash or the sock or the fucking hoodie that is laying on the floor in the middle of the hallway. They'll walk over it for a week. Nobody will ever touch that motherfucker. It will just sit there. And so my original statement is, these fucking people don't do anything, right? Well, neither have I. Right. Neither have I, Jason. And so I really try on a regular basis, daily, to the best of my ability, to just clean shit up. Just do the next right thing. Does that mean I won't bitch about it to them later? No. At least want to pick the shit up. If I'm going to expect other people to do it, I better be living it and doing it too. And that's where I want to lead by example. I want to be the trusted servant that isn't just running around telling everybody what to do like a king. Like, no, I'm here doing this too. Like, I'm not expecting you to do something I'm not. Like, let's all participate in doing this. And I just want to make sure that I'm humble enough to still be that guy.
Right.
That's important, I think.
I think so too. And our children, I've read a lot that they learn more by what you do and less by what you say.
Right.
And so similar, like these are principles that I learned through recovery, that if I want to be a good leader in my family, if I want to be a good leader in my workplace, what example am I setting? And I don't know about you, but I know we've all worked for the guy that just barks a bunch of fucking orders at you and tells you what to do, and you think, you probably couldn't even do this fucking job, And I supervise, I supervise a bunch of people that I can't do what they do. You know what I mean? They have a skill set that's beyond me, and my skill set, why I'm supervising them, is something different, And
I tend to think loud, barky guy has a really controlling wife, and he doesn't have a say at home. Maybe I'm just judging the fuck out of him.
Right. Yeah. Well, that can be it. I know in my past that trying to be like, just do what I say and don't question my authority and all that is that. It's a
Respect my authority.
It's a lack of confidence in myself and a lack of, humility and all those things.
I try to include my kids in some of my parenting skills at times, like whether it's about them and I'm like, hey, look, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is what I see keeps happening, and I don't know how to best get you from this place to the next, right? Or when we're talking about the other kids, I'm like, hey, look, I've been trying this with, your brother or sister, and I don't feel like it's working. Do you have any suggestions? And partly it's I want them to feel important and think through things critically to try to come up with solutions. But the other part of that is like, I'm really kind of out of fucking ideas. Do you have something else for me? Like, think outside this box.
Well, even asking people sometimes what they think or how they feel or what's going on, especially for our kids, like it gives them a sense of value and respect and dignity that, as a little kid, you don't get a lot in your life, especially if you're going to public school. You got somebody dictating what you do all day and what you need to do and what has to happen. And then you go home, you got parents barking at you all day, what you need to do, what you're not doing, what you have, and to have someone actually acknowledge like, hey, you're an individual with thoughts and feelings. I'd like to hear your input is so critical to their development. And yet for the longest time, I didn't recognize that. I thought my job as a parent is to dictate to them good behavior and then demand good behavior out of them and fucking correct them when they're not doing good behavior.
Right.
And their input, because I felt like that was my job as a leader, like their input into any of that was fucking irrelevant, because I thought I knew, they're kids, they're not going to want to clean their room. They're not going to want to eat their vegetables. They're not going to want to, do their homework. What fucking kid wants to do that?
Not me.
But a conversation with them can lead them around to, hey, do you like the idea of having like bugs and shit in your bedroom? Nah, probably not. Well, there are some ways you can avoid that, and we can work on that.
I haven't found that useful yet.
Yeah, that's the other thing with kids. It's hard. Is I might have to try different things.
Yeah. In Narcotics Anonymous, we rely on a loving God as he expresses himself in our group conscience rather than on personal opinion or ego. And I think this is a tough one in a world where people really don't talk or think or believe in God much anymore. And even if they do believe, I don't think it's anything they have a relationship with or a regular routine of talking to or listening for. And I know, look, there's probably people listening to that like, oh yeah, let's talk to the imaginary guy in the sky and listen for him to talk back. That sounds like mental health issues, right? That's not what I'm saying, but I just don't think this is something that's regularly used in people's lives on a daily basis. When you're not looking to rely on this loving power bigger than you for the source of how to proceed, you default back to personal opinion or ego. Like, I think that's what I took out of this quote. It's not so much, I agree. In NA, we're supposed to rely on this power to help make decisions over the personal opinions or egos of any of our members. But I think when I apply this to like daily family life, or I look at society or the community, like this is probably part of what's going wrong. People aren't including any kind of power bigger than them in their life, which means they are relying on personal opinion or ego to make all their decisions, all their parenting decisions, all their decisions in business management. Like this is what everything is being judged by: personal opinion and ego.
Yes. If we get too, I want to say focused on like, and this is where I've backed away from mainstream media, social media, all that stuff. I think the focus there so much is on the wrong things. Is so much, we've sort of created a culture where we aren't focused on the right morals and values on moving forward as a society. Luckily, I have found some outlets through podcasts and different stuff that do focus more on those things, which maybe leads to my optimism. Maybe that's part of the reason I'm optimistic. There is a movement called effective altruism, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it basically is like, how do I use the resources and things that I have now to do the absolute most good in the world? And not just in the United States. And they do sort of, when you get into it, they do focus on, all right, I have a certain responsibility to my community and my immediate community, but then I also have a responsibility to the world at large, you know.
Right.
For example, you know, if I can spend $1, I think it was, on a malaria shot for kids in Africa so that they can get a shot and not die of malaria, which kills, you know, millions of kids, $100 literally saves 100 lives, you know, and that as someone who wants to focus on doing good in the world, you know, I can look at different outlets, and there's some different resources for figuring out like which charities focus on which things. I can focus on the earth, I can focus on people, I can focus on animals, and then directing my money and resources towards helping those things. I mean, the fact that people don't even know that there's things out there like that exist, or how easy it is to help people in other countries that are dying, children I'm talking about. This isn't even the adults, this is kids. Like, to me, that's sad that we're not aware of how easy and these resources to help other people. So for myself, like, I've decided these are values that I want to focus on. And my kids will hear me listening to these things. There are things that I'll talk about with them. I try not to, you know, they're fucking kids. They don't want to hear about my weirdo hippie shit. So they don't listen a lot. But they pick up on that stuff, you know what I mean? They start to understand, like, hey, there are values more than what the fuck's going on Fox News or CNN or what's going on Facebook or whatever. As far as I know, none of my kids have Facebook, and only one of them's involved in an Instagram group that they do a lot of farm pictures. They're involved with a farm and stuff like that. I fucking chalk that up as a win, you know, and I don't know if it's any luck of mine. I mean, if luck or whatever, but I'm like, that's a win. They're not influenced by what I feel like are the lost values of our society right now.
Yeah, I'm jealous. My kids are on like TikTok and Instagram and don't seem to give much of a fuck about things that aren't the popular societal culture.
And even that, I mean, that's okay. I didn't at their age either, you know. I didn't learn till I was older, and I got a little smarter and figured some shit out and figured out, hey, man, this is a big planet. There's a lot of people here. Like, I don't want kids to suffer anywhere, you know?
Right.
Like, kids, you know, should be important to people. And, you know, so all that to go back to, for me, like, looking at my higher power's will and how do I serve that and what does that look like, you know, when I'm acting in groups and all that stuff. It's like, do I really fucking care whether you want to have abortions or not? Like, is that really the biggest thing that I need to get focused on? I know there are people that feel that it is.
I mean, if you're talking about saving kids, that would be their same argument.
Right. And again, I don't disagree that that's an important thing, but for me, is it worth trying to get in an argument with them that they're wrong? You know, like, I don't feel a need to bring that up and be like, look, we can't fucking be friends, or we can't talk or be on the same team because you feel this way and I feel this way. So we're on different teams. Fuck you. Like,
I thought you were just supposed to be friends and then leave like metal hangers in their mailbox every day.
Oh, what's a metal hang? I don't know that.
That's
one.
how they do the back alley abortions.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they have better ways now. That's like the very crude version. Another quote that came out of this is, there is often a vast difference between group conscience and group opinion as dictated by powerful personalities or popularity. And that just reminded me a lot of the direction that our society seems to go a lot of times. We vote for popularity, right? And I'm not talking about the popular vote. I'm just saying the person who spends the most on advertising wins most of these elections, like, because they're the name you've seen. And so when you walk in the polling booth, you're like, I don't know who the fuck I want for judge number 13. Oh, I've seen his name on somebody's front lawn. Like, oh, he was on a billboard. I mean, so it's interesting to see that we follow group opinion, and that's group opinion is different because it's influenced, whereas group conscience is not influenced by any one person.
Yeah, and I believe it was in our It Works How and Why of NA, which I didn't bring a copy with me, but it does talk a little bit in there about our responsibility as a member of a group. So we bear some responsibility for our decision making and being a part of having a good and healthy group conscience, having our egos in check, having our, you know, facts in order sort of thing.
Right.
And again, that's where I feel like in politics that all breaks down. Like, me as a voting member of society, I have some responsibility there. One, I have to fucking show up and vote. I mean, well, I don't have to. I don't have to do anything. Right. But if I want to be informed and I want to do my part and I want to be, serving my higher power's will, what I think is for the good or betterment of the society at large, I'm going to do a little research. I'm going to do a little reading. I'm going to try to pick who I think is the authentically best person that's available for that position, not necessarily what party I think is right. And I'm going to do those types of things in my decision making, not just, expect someone else to do all the work and then me just take credit for the group. It's like I bear responsibility if I want to carry out a higher power's will in a group conscience that I'm involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that's kind of where all this goes astray, is that we don't actively think about a bigger power than us on a daily basis. And so when we enter into any of these things, like it said, we're taking in our ego, and that's what's making our decisions, our opinion and our ego. And I got a lot of ego and a lot of opinion, and that shit gets me nowhere regularly. I'm always better off when I'm in a humble place of just trying to be my best. Like, that's where I operate best from. Another quote you and I both found was, "True spiritual principles are never in conflict. They complement each other." I don't believe that shit.
Yeah, and I've heard that over the years, and that's always kind of, I've always questioned that. I've never spent too much time delving into it. We did a little bit earlier, but I've felt the same way. I've been like, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah. Well, especially because, and we talked about this the other day, because it came across my radar, like, principles are kind of completely made up.
Right.
And spiritual principles are even more so made up,
right.
And we just kind of act like they're a thing, and they really don't have definitions, or it's weird.
Yeah, it's really hard to define what is a spiritual principle, and
I mean, the definition of principle is like a bunch of people agree that this is a good thing for people.
Important.
I'm like, wow, that says nothing.
Right.
And that can definitely change. This one I found interesting. The person we feel safe to talk to when our heart hurts may not be the same person we would choose to be our group treasurer. And I thought that was interesting, that like this was focused on who's best for these roles, right? Like, let's not elect somebody who's just our favorite person. Like, we shouldn't go, you know what? As a society, we might all think that Denzel Washington is a great fucking actor. Usually. Like, he's usually pretty good, right? I don't think that makes sense that we should go elect him for president just because we all like him as a great actor, or majority like him as a great actor. You know what I mean? Like, I think was interesting to read that in this tradition, that the idea isn't that we just elect people because we like them or because they're good at something that we like that they do, but that they fit the position we're hiring them for. Denzel Washington probably has people who manage his money and has never, ever had to like balance his checkbook or any of that stuff. So like, to elect him as the guy who runs our treasury or something wouldn't make much sense, no matter how much we like him and no matter how good of an actor he is and no matter how smart he is. Dude, you've never even messed with money. Like, maybe that's not a good idea, right?
Right, or at least even questioning, like, what is your experience in those areas?
Right.
And what practical experience have you had managing something of this size? Or
well, and look, I'm not trying to fix politics or talk too much about it. I am definitely a guy who says, man, the problem with politics is that we have politicians doing it. But honestly, I'm starting to wonder if I might not be wrong about that. Like, if you put somebody in there with no experience in politics, with no ability to be a politician, shit could get way worse. I don't know. I think maybe we do need to really question, like, when we're going into these situations, maybe I shouldn't put the kid who has not shown any cooking ability and doesn't really even like a lot of different foods as the guy making the dinner tonight, right? Like, right. You know what I mean? Like, I should dole out chores in my house based on who does them well, and just I got to think more about the bigger picture, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, and I never knew that about this tradition, honestly.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as, again, the political thing, like, I really don't feel like we have near as much power. To be frank, I don't know that I consider myself a part of that group. I don't consider myself a part of the federal government group. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's its own thing that runs its own way. That's its own machine. I like that. I mean, we have fucking media that tries to tell us our votes matter and all that shit. I don't think that's true. And I have voted, and I mean, I guess I think voting matters. I just feel like that system has become so corrupt So again, when it gets back to these like traditions, and because we talked about this with unity and stuff like that, and I guess from the unity perspective, I would say I feel like we're a United States because someone decided so. Like,
Yeah.
and as a continent, we are stronger the way that we are than separated. Maybe.
Right.
I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about that, or if we'd be stronger if we were divided. Whatever. But when I talk about the unity that I want, I try to keep it more focused on things closer to home. The broader that circle gets out, the less invested I am in that circle. So like the broader, as we get out to like the whole United States and how serving a higher power's will and all that, one, I feel my influence is almost irrelevant. And two, I don't even know if it works, but I'm still going to try. Like I'm still going to try to be a person that votes and tries to educate myself when it's time to vote and tries to research opinions and things that are going on in politics just so that I have some input that I feel like is valuable. Although it totally feels irrelevant.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk too much about politics in general. I think the traditions in my brain, like that's the first outside entity outside of a program that comes to mind when I think of where traditions might be useful. Family unit, community unit, governmental unit is basically the places I think. You always bring up work. I don't ever think of work. I'm like, fuck work. I don't do traditions at work. I don't know why. But no, I think just from this tradition specifically, at least so far, it was less about like, let's talk about politics and more like I could see why the world seems in disarray right now because we don't have something like this tradition in place. We don't collectively agree that there's some larger power guiding us, whatever that may be, the betterment of humanity or Christ. Like we don't all collectively agree that that is what guides us. And I could see why we're where we're at because we don't have that. Like it just, I guess it was more looking at it as without this tradition or without this kind of practice going on, it makes sense that we're not cohesive.
Yeah, and it almost feels like we actually somewhat do have, I don't want to say exactly a tradition like this, but we have like a constitution and a Bill of Rights that theoretically we're supposed to be adhering to, and we have these laid out political procedures and things, and that's where the corruption comes in. Like none of that seems to be followed anymore. And it's funny because one of the things I read in there that I loved, and again, I apply these mostly for me in my immediate life, but this definitely I feel like applies to politics, and it's that ego, unfounded pride, and self-will destroy a group if given authority. And I feel like that's what's happened in our politics is that ego and special interest and, you know, let's change the tax law so that these people contribute to my fucking campaign fund and, you know, that's where it's all gone astray. Yeah. We were at one point a country that had some unified values and unified rights, and I feel like that's all gotten lost. And for me, like, again, in my life, like, I have to remember that my ego, my self-will, you know, will destroy a group that I'm involved in if I don't keep it in check. If I don't watch my own self, I can be the person that destroys the group versus the person that helps hold the group together.
Yeah, I mean, politics today, you're talking big special interest money that is funding a lot of it and twisting it and corrupting it. And I think you're also talking, what I saw on Reddit was an Australian dude explaining that freedom in Australia and what they believed was in a lot of other countries that have freedom as well as us looks different to their individual citizens than freedom does to us. Like their freedom, and I can't remember the great way he explained it, but like Australians collectively appreciate their freedom and are more willing to do what's asked of them, as opposed to arguing for their individual personal freedoms of whether they're allowed to wear a mask or not in a store. Like it was like, it was an interesting dissection, and I'm not picking on anybody. I'm not saying one way's right or the other, but it was interesting to see that their idea of freedom was different than our idea of freedom. It's like the same word, right? But we really, as a collective society, look at them very differently. And apparently we're like the only country that looks at it the way we do, where it's all about my individual liberties, not the collective freedom we all share and enjoy together and what we need to do to keep it.
Yeah, like a lack of responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like we don't have a responsibility for the whole. We only have responsibility for our individual.
Well, it sounds like we've lost track of the collective power greater than us, and that our egos and opinions about me
Yeah.
are the ones running the show. I mean, that's so without a tradition like this going on, yeah, why wouldn't all these other things that it warns against happen? Like, these people probably had all these things happen and then wrote the traditions afterwards and said, oh, we don't want that shit to happen again. This is how you avoid it. And then
Yeah.
people in the world just haven't realized that we need a tradition to avoid continuation of egos and opinions. This one I found especially useful for my own personal life. We learn to stand up for a principle without feeling like we're fighting for our lives. I definitely struggle with that. So
Yeah.
I was like, well, that's crucial information. I could just stand up and be about a principle and not feel like it's life or death. No matter how this works out, it's going to be okay. And I don't have to like think that I'm going to burn somewhere on a cross because I lost.
Yeah, well, and being as, I would say, I don't know, another way to say it, so I'll say strongly opinionated as you are with the God's will part. Like, that's where I'm like,
Right.
why does it matter how strong-willed you are against an opinion anyway? It's going to go the way it's going to go, regardless of how married to the idea you are or not.
I'm God's right-hand man, and
You're
I'm here to do
powerless
his
anyway.
will. I'm here to enforce his will. I'm like the guy that killed them 2 cities in the Bible or something. No, I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
And I'm the opposite, which is even more funny. It's like, I don't think God's will works that way at all, but I don't think I'm supposed to stand up and defend my points to the vigorous end. So
Let's just switch one or the other of those personality traits. I don't care which one.
we're
Let's just
hypocritical
switch.
in the opposite way.
Let's switch and at least get on the right page for each other. We serve by being present and meeting the needs of the group as expressed by its conscience, which I just think is a beautiful statement. I kind of wish that's what we did. And I love the fact that it says by being present. You can't be of service if you ain't there.
Right.
I was like, I take that for granted. But yeah, if you're not showing up, you're not being part of the solution.
But some of what I heard in reference to the second tradition was individuals first getting into recovery and feeling like they didn't have
A say?
a voice, or that they weren't important, or that they didn't matter. And as they got involved in service and got involved with the traditions and realized, like, you are an equal part of this. Like, you have a right to have a voice, to have an opinion, to have a say in what goes on. And then learning to balance that with, and just because you have a right and have a voice and have a say, doesn't mean you get to carry that to the extreme of being self-righteous, arrogant, and egotistical.
Oh my God. This dude with 4 months clean joined my home group at one point, and on the first night he joined it at Group Conscience, brought up that we should vote on having 1.5 hour long anniversaries. And one of our other members agreed with him, and I was just like, what kind of balls does it take? Not balls, but what kind of ego? Like, what kind of walking in off the street, I'm going to fix this NA meeting? Like, I was like, wow. And I've probably been there. I'm not judging him in a negative light. It was entertaining to me at that point in time. I wasn't offended or anything, but wow. Sorry. Yeah.
So the beauty there is, whether the group did that or not, picturing like a conversation happening out of that and people being able to express freely ideas and like, hey, maybe is this, for me, I look at all those things as opportunities to challenge my own thinking and to challenge my own values. Like, I like debating people on different ideas when it doesn't get nasty. It gets ugly when it gets nasty and into name calling. But I'll talk about ideas and what I think and challenge, myself or challenge other people, because I feel like it helps me grow as a person. Like, I don't feel threatened by that. So we have at my home group, we do some things. So we had a guy, move down to our area. He was from a different area, and he didn't like the way we did some shit in the home group. And I think he had a little more time than most of us, and he was a loud, brash,
Ooh.
the definite personality over principle guy. And so he got involved, and we changed some things we did at the home group. We stopped reading a bunch of readings. We usually only do like 2 readings. We didn't even read the traditions. We didn't read a bunch of stuff. And sort of all of us were kind of like, oh, I don't know, he's got more time than us, and he's awful loud about it, so let's just do that. And that's what we did. And like to this day, there's still some things in the home group that are happening as a result of that.
It's God's will.
And he hasn't been around for a while, and he definitely hasn't been in the home group. God, it's probably been 8 or 9 years since he's even been to the home group. So
He wanted less readings?
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Less reading.
You sure? Was he related to me? I've tried to do less meetings in a home group before.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, his point was now with all these fucking readings, the first 25 minutes of the meeting are reading a bunch of readings and shit.
You know, I've heard it both ways, right? So my point was, look, there's 55 people in this fucking meeting. In 1983, when you read all these readings, there was 10 people in the meeting and everybody got to share. Now there's 55 and like 3 people are sharing. And we need more time for people so they're not walking home. But then,
Right.
you know, I've also heard the idea that like, hey, at least when those readings are going on, something sensible's being heard. Like you get all these new people sharing about nonsense shit.
Yeah,
Like,
some of the most important messages in that
right.
reading.
So, yeah, either way.
And the only reason I brought that up was to say, like, I don't know that was a right or wrong at the time. Now, what it does for me is when I'm there and I notice we don't read those readings, which is regularly, like it reminds me of that person, which I have a really fond memory of and a really fond connection to. And so for me, like, and I don't know if that's God's will or whatever, but it's like that's a reminder of that person and their relationship to me in my life. And it's kind of beautiful in a weird way.
Huh.
Like,
That's funny because I thought that story was about how one personality could change a group for years if you don't have like the egos taken out.
It is, but it's also about how at the end of the day, is any of that really what's all that important? Like,
I don't know. We don't know if people died from not hearing who's an addict.
no, I think we read that one. We didn't read traditions.
Why are we here?
Because his point was new people don't care about the traditions.
I definitely agree with him now. Now you definitely did the right thing. I know God's will happened at this point.
Right. And, you know, I guess for me, that's where this stuff kind of plays out. It's like, I don't know if that was the right or wrong decision at the moment. That was the conscience of the group. And so that's what we did.
Right.
And that's what happened moving forward. And now there's a bunch of people that probably have no idea why that's there or why it's that way or what any sort of, they just like, that fucking, those assholes don't even read the traditions. Like, what kind of meeting is that? Or they'll say occasionally people will be like, oh, you forgot one. Like,
Right.
no, we did that on purpose.
Yeah, we didn't forget. Stick to your own meeting.
Right.
So for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority. A loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. So the point of this to me is like when we're making decisions for everyone, and really honestly, I really need to apply this when I'm making decisions for myself because decisions for my life also affect those around me. So when I'm making decisions, I need to trust in a loving power that's looking out for everyone in their best interests. And to remember that, like, not to let my ego get so in the way that I think I have all the answers, that I need to, like, rule over people and dominate them. Like, I just need to try to do my best and live by example and teach other people when they're ready to learn and go from there. Right?
Yeah.
Learn from other people when they're ready to teach, like, all those things. And the questions I came to as we're kind of wrapping up here would be like, would I be a better parent if I parented from service instead of authority? I mean, for me, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I know it for me. I mean, I've had both, but I've been both of those parents, and
Same.
the latter is definitely much more rewarding.
I can't sit here and tell you that I know which one works better.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But I can tell you that I feel a whole lot better being
Yeah.
the parent out of service at the end of the day.
Definitely. And my relationship with my kids, I believe, is better because of that.
Yeah. Well, dude, I got an 18-month-old or 19 months, whatever she is at this point, and like, truthfully, she don't talk a whole lot. She's not very fun. She's fucking loud and gets grumpy when you don't give her what she wants, and she screams at you in a pitch that really hurts my ears. Like, I don't really want to necessarily be around her.
Right.
I know it sounds kind of shitty, but in the spirit of service, I am. I try to make it a point to spend time with her daily, to interact with her, because that's how relationships work. That's how things grow and build. It's important to me. But I don't do it because it's highly fucking enjoyable, right? Like it's not.
Yeah.
It's not that at all. And you know, would I be a better husband if I lived in this tradition? This idea that like I do not govern this relationship, neither does my wife. We're working towards this on what's best for us and our kids together. You know, it's not about who wins, what school they go to, or what direction we go, or how they get punished. It's more like what's best for all of us moving forward. And like, let's trust that we're going to be taken care of in whatever way we proceed.
Yeah, definitely. And also acknowledging, like I know in my marriage, like I have some different values than my wife does, and it's very easy for me to be like, well, your values, you know, you need to value my values as the highest priority, you know, and I can minimize some of her values as not being as important.
Yeah. Thinking I'm smarter than other people gets in my way of this, right? Like, oh, well, I've thought through this deeper than you have, wife dear, and obviously you should recognize by my arguments, because I'll win the debate, that, you know. It's funny. I can out-debate her, and yet I lose every fucking argument. I don't know how that works, but it does.
Yeah.
Even when I win, I feel like I lost. It's fucking terrible. Anyway, you got any final thoughts about tradition 2?
No, just like you said, I like to try and look at areas in my life where I am in a leadership role, and then try to see if I am living in alignment with the spiritual principles and values that through my step work, I've made a decision to turn my will and my life over to. You know, am I turning my will and my life over in all areas of my life, at work, at home, and my relationships with others, and my leadership roles in my community, whether that's, you know, coaching Little League or being a, you know, mentor at a Boys and Girls Club or whatever.
Right.
Like, am I really practicing these principles in all my affairs?
Sweet. Well, with that, enjoy your week. Practice some tradition 2. Practice faith that things will work out for the best, even when they don't go the way that you would hope they would go. They might be okay. And we'll see you next week. Share this podcast with people in your life who might enjoy it. Check out recoverysortof.com to find our episodes and link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're always looking for new and interesting ideas for topics, sort of. If you have any ideas for episodes or think you have something to come on and talk about, reach out to us.